liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Art of Political Discourse. Let's get right to it. February the 14th, Secretary of State Marco Rubio gave a speech at the Munich Security Conference in front of European leaders as well as European military leaders. This speech was given to address one thing in the guise of another. On the face of the speech, it regarded the United States and Europe's relationship and commonality as one. But behind that face, there was another. The real message and face that Marco Rubio wanted Europe to see was the one of colonialism. The speech was nothing but a call to Europeans, along with the United States, to renew the expanding order of control over foreign lands for the sole purpose of the exploitation of the resources and the economic domination of those lands. He said, let's regain control over the lands and people of the world for our benefit. We are brothers. Let's do this together. Now, what is being said or what's being considered is that the Western media did not cover this speech in the way that it should, especially in terms of how Marco Rubio delivered the speech. It glossed over the real what was at the core of the speech, and that is colonialism, regaining control of the world's resources, the supply chains that keep America and the West running and in power. Marco Rubio used the excuse, or in the speech, he used the phrase, a commonality. Europe and America are brothers, you know, they are related. This is United States was born from Europe, so on and so forth. But again, the message, the core of the message was to the European powers that we are losing control over the world's resources. Those who own the resources that propel and power our civilizations are going to other nations that we consider the enemy. And therefore, we must stop this transition of power of resources to our enemies rather than to us. I have to assist in this piece that we come up with, decided to do a clip from C-SPAN. It is a speech, Marco Rubio's speech in its entirety. We will play parts of the speech and, you know, discuss as we go along how this speech really will affect the peoples of the world, or those places in the world where most of the resources exist. Before we do, let me remind you to please like, share, comment, follow, as well as subscribe to the Art of Political Discourse. Your participation and your viewership would be greatly appreciated. It will allow us to continue to bring informative and educational news from around the world, not just here in the United States, but around the world, to the masses. Let's get to this clip. Now, this is Marco Rubio, and this is the beginning of his speech. Please listen to it.
Thank you very much. We gather here today as members of a historic alliance, an alliance that saved and changed the world. You know, when this conference began in 1963, it was in a nation, actually it was on a continent, that was divided against itself. The line between communism and freedom ran through the heart of Germany. The first barbed fences of the Berlin Wall had gone up just 2 years prior. And just months before that first conference, before our predecessors first met here in Munich, the Cuban Missile Crisis had brought the world to the brink of nuclear destruction. Even as World War II still burned fresh in the memory of Americans and Europeans alike, we found ourselves staring down the barrel of a new global catastrophe, one with the potential for a new kind of destruction, more apocalyptic and final than anything before in the history of mankind. The time of that first gathering, Soviet communism was on the march. thousands of years of Western civilization hung in the balance. At that time, victory was far from certain. But we were driven by a common purpose. We were unified not just by what we were fighting against. We were unified by what we were fighting for. And together, Europe and America prevailed.
And what they were fighting for, what he failed to add to that line of the speech was world dominance, control over the world, and especially back in those times, control over the people of color in the world where most of the resources actually exist.
And a continent was rebuilt. Our people prospered. In time, the East and West blocks were reunited. A civilization was once again made whole. That infamous wall that had cleaved this nation into two came down, and with it, an evil empire. And the East and West became one again. But the euphoria of this triumph led us to a dangerous delusion that we had entered, quote, the end of history, that every nation would now be a liberal democracy, that the ties formed by trade and by commerce alone would now replace nationhood, that the rules-based global order, an overused term, would now replace the national interest, and that we would now live in a world without borders where everyone became a citizen of the world. This was a foolish idea that ignored both human nature and it ignored the lessons of over 5,000 years of recorded human history. And it has cost us dearly. In this delusion, we embraced a dogmatic vision of free and unfettered trade, even as some nations protected their economies and subsidized their companies to systematically undercut ours, shuttering our plants, resulting in large parts of our societies being deindustrialized, shipping millions of working and middle-class jobs overseas, and handing control of our critical supply chains to both adversaries and rivals.
That's the part we need to start to focus on, what he just said, because from that point on, he starts to explain what he means in terms of critical supply chains, or those critical supply chains being shifted or being redirected to another sector or people of the world who they consider their enemies.
We increasingly outsourced our sovereignty to international institutions while many nations invested in massive welfare states at the cost of maintaining the ability to defend themselves. This, even as other countries have invested in the most rapid military buildup in all of human history and have not hesitated to use hard power to pursue their own interests. To appease a climate cult, we have imposed energy policies on ourselves that are impoverishing our people, even as our competitors exploit oil and coal and natural gas and anything else, not just to power their economies, but to use as leverage against our own. And in a pursuit of a world without borders, we opened our doors to an unprecedented wave of mass migration that threatens the cohesion of our societies, the continuity of our culture, and the future of our people.
What's so shocking about that statement right there is that that is exactly what the United States and other European nations, the Western worlds, did to other nations, other sovereign states. You know, it's like the kiddo calling the pot black. And the audacity for Marco Rubio or the Trump administration to want to adjust or rearrange things to fit their agenda, rather than looking at how other nations want to see and fit, you know, how they see the world to their agenda. Again, it's just, you know, it's idiotic to think that people would not want to control their own resources or to be their own boss.
We made these mistakes together. And now together we owe it to our people to face those facts and to move forward, to rebuild. Under President Trump, the United States of America will once again take on the task of renewal and restoration, driven by a vision of a future as proud, as sovereign, and as vital as our civilization's past. And while we are prepared, if necessary, to do this alone. It is our preference, and it is our hope to do this together with you, our friends here in Europe.
So there it is. Marco Rubio is saying that the Trump administration has decided that it will renew the agenda of colonialism, that it will run roughshod over any sovereign nation that has what it needs to sustain its civilization over any other. They're asking Europe to join them in this rebirth of colonialism, neo-colonialism. I might add, I think there's a new phrase being bandied about in terms of colonialism. I forget the term right now, but this is what Marco Rubio is talking about, reestablishing colonial order.
For the United States and Europe, we belong together. America was founded 250 years ago, but the roots began here on this continent long before. The men who settled and built the nation of my birth arrived on our shores carrying the memories and the traditions and the Christian faith of their ancestors as a sacred inheritance, an unbreakable link between the old world and the new. We are part of one civilization, Western civilization. We are bound to one another by the deepest bonds that nations could share, forged by centuries of shared history, Christian faith, culture, heritage, language, ancestry, and the sacrifices our forefathers made together for the common civilization to which we have fallen heir. And so this is why we Americans may sometimes come off as a little direct and urgent in our counsel. This is why President Trump demands seriousness and reciprocity from our friends here in Europe. The reason why, my friends, is because we care deeply. We care deeply about your future and ours. And if at times we disagree, our disagreements come from our profound sense of concern about a Europe with which we are connected, not just economically, not just militarily. We are connected spiritually, and we are connected culturally. We want Europe to be strong. We believe that Europe must survive, because the two great wars of the last century serve for us as history's constant reminder that ultimately our destiny is and will always be intertwined with yours. Because we know
that's the sound of an American oil company hard at work. Want to be a part of it? Listen up.
Hello.
Because we know that the fate of Europe will never be irrelevant to our own. National security, which this conference is largely about, is not merely a series of technical questions. How much we spend on defense or where, how we deploy it, these are important questions. They are. But they are not the fundamental one. The fundamental question we must answer at the outset is, what exactly are we defending? Because armies do not fight for abstractions. Armies fight for a people. Armies fight for a nation. Armies fight for a way of life.
Armies fight for the rich. That's why we have them. Armies fight for the rich in order for the rich to retain all the riches they have accumulated, and that accumulation coming from people who are weaker, from people of color, from foreign lands. Armies are comprised of, or they're built up, they're made up for that purpose. That's how armies got to be. Armies are there to do the will of the rich. If the rich should decide that there's something over there they want, they put together an army and they send them over there to get that, to take it. Armies aren't there to defend the people, in a nation that is minding its own business. Some armies come to be or come into existence for that purpose, to defend its sovereignty against those who should want to think that they can come and just take the people from the land or take the resources from the land, as they see fit. Armies came about to fight other armies who were put together by the rich who wanted something someone else had. It's real simple, but let his spin tell it. The armies exist because of national security or to protect the people. It's sovereignty. That's not really how that works. Or especially in the case of Europe, the Western world, and the United States, armies existed to do one thing. Initially, to defend itself from armies who were coming over to take something, but that army, the initial stage or reason why armies were comprised or were built up and made were to go and wage war on a people who had something the rich wanted. The rich wanted to be richer. They want to be richer. United States and Europe, these countries, as we know them in the world, are the richest countries in the world. And in order for them to maintain that wealth, they need resources. They need resources to take from other people to continue their wealth, their way of life, and damn everyone else's.
And that is what we are defending. A great civilization that has every reason to be proud of its history, confident of its future, and aims to always be the master of its own economic and political destiny. It was here in Europe where the ideas that planted the seeds of liberty that changed the world were born. It was here in Europe where which gave the world the rule of law, the universities, and the scientific revolution.
Again, this speech, man, it's a bunch of lies. And this is what the Trump administration hopes to push in order to get people in line. A lot of lies. But they don't care what the rest of the world sees or thinks about their lies. They're just trying to convince their brothers, Europeans, that this lie is something that they have to continue to live on. That everything they do for the betterment of mankind, not humans, not the human being, but mankind.
It was this continent that produced the genius of Mozart and Beethoven, of Dante and Shakespeare, of Michelangelo and Da Vinci, of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. And this is the place where the vaulted ceilings of the Sistine Chapel and the towering spires of the great cathedral in Cologne, they testify not just to the greatness of our past or to a faith in God that inspired these marvels. They foreshadow the wonders that await us in our future. But only if we are unapologetic in our heritage and proud of this common inheritance can we.
Unapologetic in their heritage. What is their heritage? What can we recall about their heritage? And why would he say we're unapologetic in our heritage? They make no apologies for the destruction that they've laid across the world. They make no apologies for chattel slavery, the decimation of whole populations, all for the sake of wealth. And this is Marco Rubio just speaking for the rich. This is Marco Rubio speaking for the rich. It's not speaking for the people. The people are not rich. Actually, the people don't write the laws. The rich do. The corporations. This speech is for them. It's not for the people.
We together begin the work of envisioning and shaping our economic and our political future. Deindustrialization was not inevitable. It was a conscious policy choice, a decades-long economic undertaking that stripped our nations of their wealth, of their productive capacity, and of their independence. And the loss of our supply chain sovereignty was not a function of a prosperous and healthy system of global trade. It was foolish. It was a foolish but voluntary transformation of our economy that left us dependent on others for our needs. and dangerously vulnerable to crisis. Mass migration isn't some fringe concern of little consequence. It was and continues to be a crisis which is transforming and destabilizing societies all across the West. Together, we can reindustrialize our economies and rebuild our capacity to defend our people. But the work of this new alliance should not be focused just on military cooperation and reclaiming the industries of the past. It should also be focused on together advancing our mutual interests in new frontiers, unshackling our ingenuity, our creativity, and the dynamic spirit to build a new Western century.
Okay. This is a long speech, about 30 minutes. His last part, what he just said before I stopped it was about renewing or rebuilding economic dominance. And there's only one way to do that. And he implied what that is to reassure, to regain critical supply chains. What does that mean? It means then that they have to recolonize all those lands or those nations that hold the resources that they need to continue to be in power, to continue their heritage. And anybody not with them is against them, is an enemy. And that would include the lands that hold these resources that won't give them willingly or freely. They will take them. Any other nation that works with the nations that hold these resources are the enemy. They're taking something that the West or America considers it owns, that it belongs to them, in spite of the sovereignty of the lands that hold these resources. None of that matters. What matters is we gain, or the United States and the West regain control over the world and its resources. That's the threat. That's the threat that a lot of us fail to recognize, that we fail to act against. You know, we are so caught up because the way the West and the United States plays the game is confusing. You never know from 1 minute to the next, one agenda to the next, one treaty to the next, how America or Europe will stab you in the back. They always have some scheme, a plot going. This is a problem for other nations, for those nations that hold or have resources that the West and the United States want. They're starting to wake up. And I think that's the reason for the speech. If you look in these lands, they are deciding that sovereignty works for them rather than it working for those who need those resources in these sovereign lands. All right. Venezuela is just an example. Africa is another example. How France is refusing to relinquish what it calls its rights to those resources. Trying everything in the book to overturn governments that are taking care for the first time their people. That hurts France because France used those resources to take care of its civilization, its society, the rich. So there that is. This is the art of political discourse. We would like to ask that you, again, like, share, comment, follow, and subscribe to this channel so that we can continue to bring informative as well as educational news from around the world, not just here in our backyard or in the United States. Your viewership and participation will be and is greatly appreciated. Take care of yourselves and each other.
You can murder a liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder a revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom.